It gives me great pleasure to introduce the closing keynote this evening of the Young Lawyers Making Change conference. I'm Tara Mulcair. I'm a solicitor at the Civil Department at Bernburg Pierce and a committee member of Young Legal Aid Lawyers. We are delighted this evening to be joined by Professor Leslie Thomas QC and Danielle Manson, both of Garden Court Chambers. First, I'm going to run through the conference and organisers, and then I'll formally introduce our speakers. So for those of you who don't know, the Young Lawyers Making Change Festival aims to educate and inspire social welfare lawyers of the future and begin to build a network of like-minded junior lawyers committing to working in areas traditionally funded by legal aid. This is our third year, but the first virtual conference thanks to coronavirus. The conference is a collaboration between PLP, the Justice First Fellowship and Young Legal Aid Lawyers, and we are extremely grateful to the Legal Education Foundation for sponsoring us. Just a quick run through of the organisers. So PLP is a legal charity which aims to improve access to public law remedies through research and strategic litigation. Huge thanks to Amelie, PLP's Events and Communications Officer, for all of her work behind the scenes. The Justice First Fellowship was established by the Legal Education Foundation to support the next generation of students who want to pursue a career in social welfare law. Each year it teams up with firms to create placements for individuals to train and become solicitors and barristers. Future barristers, I'm sad to say that this year there aren't any pupilages, but there are a record number of training contracts, 19 training contracts, starting in January 2021. The recruitment opened last Monday, so definitely check that out if you're an aspiring social welfare solicitor. And finally, Young Legal Aid Lawyers was founded 15 years ago, and it exists to represent the voice of aspiring and junior lawyers committed to practicing in legal aid. We campaign for social mobility and a sustainable legal aid system. And Young Legal Aid Lawyers is entirely free to join, so check out our website where you can sign up for free there. So tonight we are delighted to be joined by Leslie and Danielle. Professor Leslie Thomas QC requires no introduction, but I'm going to give it a go. Leslie is a barrister at Garden Court Chambers. Leslie was called to the bar in 1988 and took silk in 2014. Earlier this year, Leslie was appointed as a Professor of Law at Gresham College, and he will be delivering a lecture series called Death, the State and Human Rights starting later this year. Leslie will be the first Black Gresham Law Professor. Leslie is a leading expert in claims against the police and other public authorities and inquests and public inquiries. He's the go-to specialist for deaths in custody, restraint-related deaths, police shootings and police pursuits, and he literally wrote the book on inquests. Leslie has acted as counsel in dozens of high-profile Article 2 inquiries, including the Grenfell Tower inquiry, the independent inquiry into child sex abuse, and the Anthony Granger and Ezell Rodney inquiries. Leslie has been instructed in high-profile cases such as the Birmingham pub bombing inquest, the Sean Rigg inquest, and the Hillsborough inquests. He's ranked as a leading silk in civil liberties in the Legal 500, and in this year's Chambers Directory in the Civil Liberties and Human Rights category, a referee said, "Leslie is a force of nature, a fantastic jury advocate and second to none as a cross-examiner. He gets the core points out and does it in style. Juries love him." Danielle Manson is a criminal defence barrister at Garden Court, and she is a friend of Weiler. Danielle represents clients in the Magistrates Court and the Crown Court in all areas of criminal law. She has particular expertise in representing children and young people. Before commencing pupillage, Danielle worked for the law reform charity Justice, and her research contributed to their intervention in the Supreme Court case of Hallam and the Secretary of State for Justice, which regarded the eligibility for compensation for victims of miscarriages of justice. Danielle was the inspiration for Wyler's Take Your MP to Work Day, after she took Labour MP Bambos Charalambous to Thames Magistrates Court. And after he attended court, Bambos tweeted, "An eye-opening visit to the Thames Magistrates Court to see the criminal justice system in action," with Danielle, who received her papers at 7:43 a.m. this morning. "I observed a court ill-equipped to deal with a defendant in a wheelchair, an unrepresented man who pleaded guilty, and other shortcomings." Just in terms of structure, everyone, Leslie and Danielle are going to speak for about an hour, and then we'll have half an hour for questions at the end. If you're on Twitter, please use the hashtag YLMC2020 or hashtag Young Lawyers Making Change. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Leslie and Danielle.
Thank you. Just to check, you can hear me okay? Great, okay. Well, hi Danielle. It's really good to be in conversation with you, this afternoon. And just so that everybody knows what Danielle and I have decided to do, we thought about a series of questions which we thought would be interesting for you to have answers to. So I'm going to start. So Danielle, I'm going to ask you one of those questions that you've probably often been asked. Tell me, what made you want to become a lawyer? And in particular, a barrister? And to those watching this and listening to this, what advice would you give them to our would-be advocates?
Thanks, Leslie. Can I just do the same and check that everyone can hear me? Yeah, great. And also, before we start, I know this isn't in conversation, but I just need to say that I'm crushing on Leslie just as much as everyone else right now. So it's really it's really exciting to be able to speak to you, because obviously your career sort of speaks for itself, whereas I'm just at the start. In terms of what made me want to become a lawyer, and a barrister in particular, I'll be really honest, I sort of fell into being a barrister quite by accident. My background is that I'm from Nottingham originally. I grew up on a council estate to a single parent. My dad was in prison for a lot of my childhood. And then when I was 10 years old, my mum was arrested and charged with quite a serious criminal offence. She was a woman of good character. She was an English teacher, in fact, and she was remanded by the courts, and there was a period of time where both my parents were in prison and I was just sort of with my grandparents. Eventually she got bail, and she was on bail up until the trial, and then when we had the trial about a year later, she was acquitted, fortunately. But I think for me that's really where my interest and understanding of the legal system came from, because I had that exposure at quite a young age, and I'd done the prison visits to see my dad, etc. And then I'd seen the jury system sort of work, to our benefit. In terms of being a barrister, sort of in particular, I didn't know any barristers. Obviously, my mum had one representing her for her court case, but I didn't have any friends or any friends' dads who were barristers. So I think for me, it was really when I went to university, and I sort of started working on something called the Innocence Project, which was where, as law students, you get to work on criminal appeals, people who are maintaining their innocence post-conviction. And I suppose my interest was sparked because of what had happened to my mum. I was just thinking the whole time, you know, gosh, this could have been our family, you know, lodging an appeal after a jury's found her guilty. And that was really where the sort of passion and interest came from. In terms of advice, I think I would say 3 things, typical barrister. Firstly, you need to have determination and resilience in this job, because I'm sure I'll go on and talk about later, but you will get rejected, you will get told no, you will get told this profession isn't for you. But I can absolutely tell you that this profession is for anyone who is watching this. I'm not a typical candidate by any standards, and this profession has welcomed me with open arms. I've been supported by some incredible, formidable people who are really at the top of their game, you know, judges and silks, people who really don't owe me anything. They've gone out of their way to help me on my way, you know, to a job that ultimately I think is the best job in the world. I couldn't imagine doing anything else. So be determined and be resilient, because you'll get knocked back. You will get knocked back, but there are also people there who are going to sort of champion you and support you. Secondly, I would say be yourself, or be as much of yourself as appropriate, because when it comes to being a barrister and ultimately going on and securing tenancy after you've done pupillage, you want to be in a chambers where you feel comfortable, where you can express yourself. And I had a bit of a sort of wobbly journey. I didn't go straight into tenancy, but ultimately the place that I've ended up, Garden Court, is exactly where I belong. It's where I can, you know, speak my mind freely. I don't feel like I have to pretend to be something I'm not. So definitely be yourself, because ultimately you won't be happy otherwise. And finally, say yes to everything. Say yes to everything you're asked to do. I would say yes to. Obviously, we have to balance our mental health and we have to not work ourselves into the ground. But I think that at the beginning of your career, and even before you've started pupillage, when you're at university, when you're working as a paralegal in a law firm, say yes, because it just opens so many doors. And it's not always about the experience, but it's also about who you're going to meet, and you just never know. Like, I never thought in a million years I'd be sitting here in conversation with Leslie Thomas. So it just goes to show you what saying yes can achieve. I think, yeah, that's really what I'd say. What about you, Leslie? What made you want to become a lawyer, and in particular a barrister?
It's a really difficult question, because I know that it was probably about the age of 13, 14, something happened to me, in the sense that I became a little bit radicalized. I think I was doing sociology at school, and had a really, really great sociology teacher. And we're just looking at various injustices in the world. And I thought to myself, how can I go about putting things right? And I just made a decision that, I want to be a lawyer. I didn't know the difference between barristers and solicitors. Didn't have a clue. I come from a relatively humble, modest background. I lived in social housing. My mum was an auxiliary nurse. My dad worked for British Telecom as a technician, and both my folks used to, work every hour that there was, and there were 3 of us: my older sister, my younger brother, and we effectively used to fend for ourselves when mum was working, because she used to work nights, and when dad was out at work. And what I said, I had become a little bit radicalized from studying sociology at school, and it all came together when one day I was on my way home from school. I was in my school uniform, and a police van pulled up alongside me, and several police officers jumped out, and one of them said to me, I look suspicious. I said, yeah, I'm in a uniform. And he said that he wanted to search me. And I said, why? What have I done? What have I? What do you think I've done? And he goes, you fit the description of somebody who's committed a burglary. There's no particulars. You fit the description. And I had the wherewithal to know that when you're a young black lad in South London growing up, you don't let the police put their hands in your pocket, because too many of my friends had been planted with drugs and stuff like that. And this officer went to put his hands in my pocket, and I kind of stepped back and brushed his hand away from me. And the atmosphere immediately changed. You don't tell us what to do, and became really hostile, really aggressive towards me. And I thought to myself, what am I going to do here? And I remembered at that point in time, the advice that my mum had constantly been giving me. You don't cross the police, you treat the police with respect, you don't backchat them. And so, I just, became subdued, and I allowed them to search. But unfortunately, they didn't plant anything on me. It was, sort of like, yes sir, no sir. And, they sent me away with a flea in my ear, kind of thing. And it really burned me. I was so upset at that experience. And I thought to myself, that I'm not gonna tolerate that. That isn't right. And I think at that point, with what I had been studying at school and that experience, and obviously what everything that had been happening to colleagues and peers of mine, I just thought, I wanted to be a lawyer. I've got to be a lawyer. I've got to make a difference. And here's the thing, when I talk about this experience, many of my white colleagues in this profession will never have experienced this. Many of my white colleagues will never have had their parents say to them what my parents said to me about, you've got to be, careful. You've got, don't backchat the police. You've got to be careful. How many of people who look like me have had parents say similar things to them? Yeah. It's a rite of passage. And I just knew that I wanted to make a difference, and I just wanted to get into law no matter what I did. I just became focused to do that. There was one problem. I was a bit rubbish at school, and and I remember that it's one thing saying that you want to be a lawyer. It's one thing thinking that you want to be one of those lawyers in court that argues. But it's a totally different thing in terms of the road there. Now, when I say I was rubbish at school, I wasn't focused at school. I had the capability, but I just wasn't focused. And the reason why I wasn't focused at school was because I went to this comprehensive school in South London, and my teachers were great. They were lovely people, and I wouldn't say anything bad about my school. But the reality is, I came from an environment whereby the kids didn't get it. We didn't understand the route, the pathway in terms of trying to make it and make it to universities. I came, at one stage, our class sizes were 38 in a class.
Yeah.
You know, at one stage, our school population was nearly 2,000. You know, so it was this massive comprehensive school, which as I went through the school, it began to shrink and get smaller. But I remember getting to the 5th year. What's 5th year? Year 11, is that what you
Year
call
11,
it? Yeah. I remember getting to year 11, and when I was there, you know, I was thinking, well, I've got to do my GCSEs and all the rest of it. And, well, they were O levels when I did them, and I failed them. You know, I failed them, but my school was such, they allowed me to start my A levels, and I was doing my A levels and retaking my A levels, and I passed my O levels during the first year of my A levels. And then I remember I failed my A levels. You know, I just got really crap grades, and so I was retaking my A levels, and I was making applications to various you know, unis. And I remember, things are so different now. I remember getting an interview at Kingston, and there was a couple of professors there. One of them was a woman called Penny Derbyshire, who interviewed me. And I don't know what she saw in me, but she saw something in me, and they made me an unconditional offer of a place. You know, don't ask me why, but they made me an unconditional offer to sit on their law. And that was at a time when Kingston, even, you know, 30 odd years ago, were asking for B's and A's to get in, and I got in. I'm not even going to tell you what my A-level results were, because
go on, you know, tell us.
No, I will not publicly embarrass myself with sort of like 42 strangers on the internet. But anyway, I got into Kingston, and when I got to Kingston and I started doing law, suddenly everything clicked. You know, I became focused. I got it. I was, you know, working hard. I was working every hour. And by the time I finished Kingston, you know, I came near top of my year. And one of my professors at Kingston saw promise in me and said to me, look, I'm going to get you, he said, what do you want to do? I said, I want to go to the bar. I want to become a barrister. I didn't know anybody in the profession. But you know, 30 odd years ago was a time whereby, you know, there was the old boys network, which predominantly worked for, you know, white men. But my professor had a friend of his who he studied with at Cambridge in this commercial set of chambers, and he got me this pupillage. I just turned up for it. You know, I didn't have to interview. You know, just got this pupillage. And I started doing this commercial pupillage, and you know, I was just grateful for the fact that I you know, got a pupillage without, you know, having to even interview for it. You know, completely wrong in the sense that, you know, totally unequal opportunities, but it worked for me.
Yeah.
And I'm doing this commercial, and I'll finish it. I'm doing this commercial pupillage. I realised, although I was thankful for the training, I hated it. I hated working for these big corporate entities. And the moment came for me when we had this conference where my supervisor was working for this big chemical company that blew this man up. And we had this settlement meeting with his widow. And she was on her own with one, you know, lawyer, and there was a ton of suits, corporate suits, all the lawyers. You know, we had about, I don't know what, we had about six lawyers representing the company, and this widow only had one lawyer. And I walked into this settlement meeting, and I thought to myself, I'm on the wrong team. I'm on the wrong team. And I left that meeting, you know, and I just went and I started working. Even though I had this commercial pupillage, and even though I had this career set ahead of me where I probably could have done very well, I didn't want to do it, and I went and I started working and volunteering for every law centre that would have me around London, and I was doing about for 4 nights a week. I was doing voluntary work for a different law centre, and it was at one of the I was working for, as it then was, National Council for Civil Liberties. Now it's known as Liberty. I was one of their legal letter writers on a Wednesday evening, I think it was. And I did that for about a year, and I met at their Christmas do a guy called Tony Gifford, who was the head of Wellington Street, and he invited me along. He saw me, and we'd over the hors d'oeuvres or whatever. He said, "What are you doing here?" And I said to him, "I was working for Liberty, doing these legal letter writing, and during the day I was working in this, doing this commercial pupillage." And he said, "What are you doing that for?" And he invited me along to Wellington Street. And they interviewed me there and then the following week and offered me a third 6 and took me on. So, as I say, this was years ago, but at every stage I kind of landed on my feet. Now, the only other thing I would say is, in terms of advice I'll give to advocates, who would be advocates, is the situation is entirely different now, right? But I do know that there were certain things that really helped me on my way and where I am today. And the first thing I would say in terms of giving people advice is, you really have to be crystal laser clear as to what you want and where you want to go. For me, I knew I wanted to become a lawyer, but I now know that it's all to do with goal setting. So it's really important that you set a goal, and goals can't be just sort of like wishing around in your head, swishing around there. You've got to write them down, and you've got to look at your goal every day, and you've got to make a plan to achieve your goal. And then you've got to, when I say make a plan, you've got to take action. You've got to, start now, don't wait. Small incremental steps, anything that moves you nearer towards your goal, you've got to take, and never, ever, ever give up, because the thing about this profession is, and I know that between people who are successful, and I can see that in you, Tara, and people who aren't successful, there are those of us who start, and the first obstacle we get disheartened and give up. And there are those who just are dogged and never, ever, will never take no for an answer. And I think if you're really interested in becoming a lawyer, you have to have the mindset that nobody's going to stop you. Yeah. Right? No matter what, no matter how badly you finish, no matter how, and you can see that with the fact that I failed my O-levels, I failed my A-levels, but I didn't give up. I kept on going. I think that's what's really, it's better to fail and die failing than not starting. So that's the advice I would give. So, let me ask you this, Tara. There's been a lot of discussion at the moment about marking, GCSEs, A-levels, algorithms, the bar final course with the BSB. This is all very topical. I'm really interested in your pathway. Was it straightforward?
No, not at all. I mean, it was insofar as the fact that I went to university and I studied law, and then I went on and I did the bar course, and then I did pupillage, and I got tenancy. So that was a sort of a straight line, but I didn't travel it in a very straight way. And actually, like you say, it's really topical at the minute, because I encountered 3 huge obstacles during that journey. So the first was my A-level results. So I have to say to anyone who's watching who are getting their results this year, if I was in your cohort, I think I would have really, really struggled, because when I did my A-levels, it was at a time where it was AS and A2. So you took a set of exams at the end of your first year and a set of exams at the end of your second year. And for my AS results, I got a B, 2 Cs and a D. I just, you know, I was bright. I got A's and A stars at GCSE.
Those are good. Those are good.
Well, my English teacher mother told me that they were not good enough, and that I needed to stop going out, because obviously when I was sort of doing my A-levels, I was kind of, you know, socialising a lot. I went to a college, so I left my school. I didn't go to sixth form, so I went to a college, and, you know, I thought I was grown up. I was going out on a Monday night to Zanzibar, the local club. I never got my EMA, my education maintenance allowance, because you had to have 100% attendance all week, and I never got my EMA. I was always marked late by Martin Pickford, who was my media studies tutor. I remember his name forever. He was always marking me down late. So yeah, I got a B2 Cs and a D, and at the end of my first year, I sort of had to review the position, because I knew that I was capable of doing more, and I wanted to do better than that. And I worked really hard in my second year. I did a couple of retakes, and I managed to convert those grades. I dropped D, don't get me wrong, I dropped that, but I managed to convert the B and 2 Cs into 2 A's and a B. And, you know, I really, really sympathise with what every A-level student has gone through over the past coming weeks, because I think if I was in this cohort, even now that the algorithm has sort of been put to one side, if I was getting my grades based on sort of predicted grades, teacher assessed, you know, we know that there is sort of some form of bias against Black candidates in those circumstances in any event, even without the algorithm. But I think I certainly wouldn't have got the grades to get me into the University of Sheffield, which is ultimately where I went, and where I had a very, very happy 3 years. So that was the first issue that I encountered, that I think I just hadn't applied myself, is the honest answer. But fortunately, the system allowed me to rectify that. And I think that's really important, because when you're that age, you know, you need the opportunity to be able to demonstrate what your true potential is. And so overcame that A-level hurdles, got the 2 A's and a B, went off to the University of Sheffield, had a wonderful time, didn't really think about being a barrister. I think a lot of undergraduates will probably identify with the fact that certainly when I was at university, the Magic Circle training contracts are very much the career option that is put in front of you. And, you know, it pays very well. They will pay for your LPC. You know, if you're coming from a background where you don't have money and you don't have those resources, that sort of lucrative career is going to appeal. Why wouldn't it? And, you know, I didn't really understand the concept of human rights, and I enjoyed studying criminal law sort of academically, but I'd never really thought about the bar or anything like that. And so I sort of, you know, trundled my way through university, got my 2-1 at the end, was nominated for the Chancellor's Medal when I graduated, because, you know, one of my university lecturers recognised that I'd really put a lot of time and effort into the Innocence Project. You know, that sort of vocational side to academic study was really where I thrived. And then, yeah, I graduated, and I just stopped. I didn't have a plan. I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I did what not every, but most university students do. And I took myself off on a little gap year. And I went to Peru, and I travelled around South America, and, you know, I had a wonderful time. And I came back, and, you know, I just thought, I don't know what I want to do. I don't want to be a commercial lawyer. I know that. What are my options? barrister, that sort of appeals. And so I was looking around on the internet for, I was looking for mini pupillages actually, because I hadn't even, I was graduated 2 years by that point and I hadn't even undertaken a mini pupillage. And I came across a job advert at Doughty Street, and they were looking for a junior clerk. And I thought, okay, I'll give that a go. It was an entry-level position. You didn't require any experience. I was very open on my job, on my covering letter, and I said, I think I'd like to be a barrister. This job would give me exposure to, the law and the bar. And lo and behold, 2 weeks after getting off the plane from Peru, I was packing up my suitcase in Nottingham, moving down to London and starting a job at Doughty Street, where I spent the year, photocopying, carrying boxes. I wasn't doing anything academic or anything directly relevant to me being a barrister, but I was working every day with barristers. I was widening my network. I was learning about, other organisations that I just never heard of. I grew up in Nottingham, and I'd never heard of Liberty. I'd never heard of Amnesty International. I'd never heard of Reprieve or Redress. And there were all these sort of amazing organisations that were involved with Doughty Street that I was being exposed to. So, I did my year of carrying boxes from Doughty Street all the way down to the Royal Courts of Justice, and after that experience, after spending time with some really incredible and some really kind barristers in that chambers, I thought to myself, I can do this. They can do it, I can do it. And they were very supportive and sort of instrumental as an organisation in me taking the next step and doing the bar course. So got a scholarship from Lincoln's Inn, so must give them a shout out. Thank you very much. I got my Lord Denning scholarship because obviously the cost of the bar course is absolutely astronomical. Absolutely no way I would have been able to fund that on my own. And off I went and I did the bar course, which again, I didn't particularly enjoy. I didn't feel very engaged with. I found it all a bit staged and a bit sort of stale. And unfortunately for me, when I sat my exams, the centrally assessed exams, which I know are causing huge problems for many, many students at the minute, I failed my civil litigation paper by 3 marks, I'd like to add, but it was a fail nonetheless. And I was obviously very disappointed with that. And that was this chapter of my life is something that I'm going to tell. I haven't really vocalized it on Twitter or anything, even though I can see the struggle that students are going through at the minute. And I don't really talk about it, but actually in telling this story, I hope that if there are any bar students watching, that you get a little bit of hope from this story. Because it culminated in me proposing to judicially review the Bar Standards Board. But ultimately, I failed my civil litigation exam. I enrolled on a number of occasions to resit it, but there were various things that happened in my personal life that meant I couldn't. For example, I had an accident and I dislocated my shoulder 2 days before one sitting. I wasn't able to do it. Another sitting, I'd ran the London Marathon and I was just absolutely, not really in a fit state to be revising, etc. And so I got to the point where I was ready and able to sit the exam. I'd booked myself on a train from Nottingham to come down to London to sit the exam, and the train that I was on was unfortunately involved in a collision, and someone lost their life. There was a suicide on the train, and I was 3 hours late. I contacted the BSB. I explained the situation to them, and they told me that actually there was a 2-year time limit rule that meant that any retakes had to be undertaken within 2 years of finishing the course. What was very unusual when I looked at the regulations was that anyone that had done the course part-time was allowed 3 years. And so I was sort of saying to them, well, that doesn't make any sense. And if I had done it part-time, things would have been different. And they said, absolutely not. their exact words were, "We never allow any exceptions to the time limit rule." And I mean, this sort of links back to what you were saying, Leslie, about how you have to be sort of like a dog with a bone with this, because I was like, no, that's not right. Well, it's not legal for a start, but that's not right. Morally, that's not right. And my example wasn't very good. But what, for example, what if another person on the course had been diagnosed with cancer and hadn't been able to take their exam, and then needed 2 years to have chemotherapy and surgery, and then they got well again and they wanted to resit this exam? And I just thought, no, that's not right. Anyway, cut a long story short, I called in some favours from people that I'd worked with at Doughty Street. I called in some favours from some other barristers that I know, drafted a letter before action, threatened proposed judicial review proceedings on the basis that it was irrational and that they were fettering their discretion, and ultimately was able to secure a change in the rules. The BSB backed down. They aligned the time limit, so it's now 3 years for any retakes from the end of the course, and they've introduced an extenuating circumstances policy for anyone falling outside of that. So
and all of that happened because of you.
Yeah, and because I was so determined, and because I was so angry, and because I thought, I'm not paying another £16,000 to do this course again. I'm not redoing the whole course. It's difficult enough for people like me to get on and do it. So anyway, that's my sort of BSB story. That was a huge obstacle to overcome. And then I was lucky, I secured pupillage. I went on and did pupillage. I really enjoyed it. I was at a set that did criminal defence only. It was, I took to it like a duck to water. I had really great references. I was supported by a lot of people in chambers. And then I wasn't taken on. I didn't get tenancy. So I was very disappointed, picked myself back up, went along to another set of chambers, did a 3rd, 6th there, was there for 10 months, again, worked really hard, had really great feedback, did a lot of extra work for people, followed my own advice earlier, said yes to everything, and I didn't get taken on. And so I was at a very difficult point in my life after having been a pupil for about 2.5 years, not being paid very much in the magistrates' court, emotionally and physically exhausted, my imposter syndrome wreaking havoc, just making me feel like I was just totally, wholly inadequate. And I think there was a point where I thought, this isn't for me. Like, I can't find my place. I can't fit in here. They're just not ready for someone like me who's perhaps not as polished. And then fortunately along came Garden Court, and I had the opportunity to do a 3rd, 6th at Garden Court, which I did. Again, I had a brilliant sort of 8 months at Garden Court, and I had my interview for tenancy not very long ago, Leslie. I'm still only a probationary tenant, and the rest, as they say, is history. So those are sort of obstacles that I've overcome, and I hope by sharing them, anyone that's watching sort of thinks, if you're going through anything similar or anything dissimilar, just take from my story that actually you can overcome the obstacles, you can beat the odds, you can beat the institutions, you can make a name for yourself, and you can go on and have a very successful career. But I guess that's all relatively recent, Leslie, so I'm more kind of interested in you about, I don't know what it was like for you, 30 years ago, I suppose. I don't like to say it, but you said you were called in 1988. Is that right? That was the year I was born. So there we go. So,
I am feeling old. You know what? There are times when I think the good news is the profession is not like how it was when I started. And then there are other times when I feel there hasn't been much. And so it was horrible. Judges were horrible. Judges were really bullying. Judges were really racist. Nobody's gonna call you the N-word to your face, right? But just the overt hostility and racism, I'll never forget. That it actually was my first appearance in court, and I was doing a family case, and I was representing a dad who was trying to get custody, or trying to get some shared custody of his kids. And I was in the old RCJ, the Royal Courts of Justice, in, I can't remember which room it was, but they used to have a room where they used to deal with all of these applications. And I hadn't trained in family law. It was one of those first briefs, sets of instructions that I was given. And I went across this court, and as soon as I opened my mouth, the sneer that I got from this judge, just, he looked at me as if, what are you doing here? And goodness grief, did I put my foot in it because I said I'm here representing the dad? Oh my goodness. Dad, you don't use that word in this court. And I was thinking to myself, what have I said? What have I said? What have I said? What did I say wrong? You don't call him dad. I said, okay, it's the word okay to me.
Oh my gosh.
And this judge completely humiliated me. And the thing is, right, here's the thing. My opponent, who was a white man, was saying similar things to what I was saying. But that, it was, yes, Mr. Smith, no, Mr. Smith, of course, Mr. Smith. Mr. Smith, you want to drop the order? And, and then sneer at me again as if, I would be incapable of doing something. And that was typical. That was typical of the type of treatment that I was receiving as a young black barrister back then. Now, some of you who are listening to this may well be thinking, oh, well, maybe Leslie's just being a bit sensitive in relation to this, right? And that's the thing, right? Back then, when you took your complaint back to other members of chambers, all judges are like that. They're being sensitive. You're being you just make it wash off your back, But the thing is, right, a lot of the people who I was asking advice from were white barristers, and it's all very well for them to be saying, but they never experienced this, or they never experienced it to the same hostility. And the thing is, when I speak to many other people of colour, they experience many similar things. Now, you asked me the question, what was it like 30 years ago, and have things changed? The horrible thing that I'm knowing and beginning to learn now, things have not changed much. And that's the tragedy.
Right.
Things have not changed much. Yeah, there is more subtlety about it, but I've heard horror stories from, black women at the bar who have had the most horrendous experience with white judges. And so it depresses me that, some of the same nonsense that I had to put up with is still being put up with by my black brothers and sisters today. And I find that heartbreaking. I don't, I'm different now in the sense that I'm a QC, I'm well known, I'm a professor of law, and therefore, some of the nonsense, people just wouldn't dare to try on with me. But people who are walking in the same colour of skin as I am are still putting up with that, and that is what really upsets and burns me. And I think it's really important that no matter where you get, doesn't matter that you're a professor of law, it doesn't matter that you're a Queen's Counsel. I think it's really important that we all acknowledge and stand by, you know, sort of like those who are still going through this. So, Danielle, things haven't changed that much. Look, let me ask you this. You have spent your career, and I can see that from, you know, the resume that we've all been given about you, fighting for the rights of people who who's a young lawyer and you want to make a difference because you want to be active. Can you tell me this? Do you think it's possible to make change as a young entrant to the bar? And how would you go about offering that advice?
I mean, yeah, definitely. You can make change. You can make a difference. It's difficult when you first start out. I think partly because of what you've already identified, that when you're very junior, you're perhaps treated in a certain way by judges or senior members of the profession. But certainly in a criminal law context, my approach is very much, and you have to be brave to do this, but you cannot be complicit in any sort of injustice. And this is particularly relevant to the magistrates' court, because obviously I've spent, you know, a lot of my time there so far, not during COVID, obviously, but in my career to date. And it is really, really scary, the things that happen down there. A quick story for you, just to give you an example. I was instructed to represent a youth in the youth court. We were in front of a lay bench, and he was charged with possession of a bladed article and escaping lawful custody. And the background was that he himself had been the victim of a stabbing. He had been taken to hospital. He'd had surgery. And you know, he'd sort of had a pretty rough time, and when he woke up he was under arrest, sort of wasn't aware that he was under arrest, thought the police were there to protect him, but had then subsequently sort of fled from the hospital looking for his dad. Not only that, but he had severe learning difficulties, and we required an intermediary for the trial. So that's the background. I turn up to represent him. I'm there at 9:30. He's not there. I speak to Dad on the phone. Dad says to me, look, we're on our way, but it's been really difficult to get him out. He doesn't want to come to court. He's sort of quite scared, but I'm going to be there in about an hour. I then go into the bench to these lay magistrates and I say, well, my client's on his way. There's going to be a delay. The court then has to decide whether or not to grant me it's effectively an adjournment I'm asking for, just a sort of 1 hour adjournment. And would you believe, in a case such as that, the magistrates refused my application for an adjournment and sought to proceed in the absence of my client. Now, I was absolutely furious, and I called my instructing solicitor and I just said, this is a total travesty, and I could stay and continue to represent him and cross-examine witnesses. I'd had a rough proof of evidence, but I hadn't confirmed instructions, and I hadn't had the benefit of a conference with an intermediary. And me and my instructing solicitor came to the view that me staying there during that trial would be me being complicit in something that should not be happening. They were wrong in law, they were wrong in principle, and I just didn't want to be a part of it. And so with my instructing solicitor's permission, I went back into the bench and I said, well, thank you, but unfortunately I'm going to have to withdraw from this case now. But if you would permit me, I'll sit at the back of court and I'll take a note of what happens. Thank you very much. Well, it was a bit like a film, because lo and behold, the court clerk comes bursting through the doors at that stage and says, oh, the defendant's here. And then sure enough, the chairman of the bench was sort of tail between his legs. Oh, Miss Manson, would you consider representing him again? And I said, well, I will, but you need to permit me time to have a conference. He's got learning difficulties. I'm not going to be rushed. And, you know, that's one of the hardest things when you're just starting out on your feet. You have to push back against this desire in the magistrates' court to be efficient, to rush, to get everything on, because you do it at the expense of justice. And so really, that's where my starting point is in terms of ensuring that, you know, I can fight for justice whilst I'm on my feet, whilst I'm doing my actual court work. In terms of what I do outside of the court arena, I'm pretty vocal on Twitter, and actually I think social media is a really great way for new up-and-coming lawyers to kind of have their voice heard. And, you know, again, back to the BSB fiasco, that really has been galvanized through Twitter, through constant tweets, you know, raising it in the public domain. I'm also a committee member of a new organisation called Black Protest Legal Support, which was set up in the wake of the death of George Floyd, and we send legal observers on the ground to Black Lives Matter protests. And really, that's another sort of good way. It links into my criminal defence work, it links into the protest work that I do as well, but it's kind of being part of a grassroots organisation on the ground. And there are loads of organisations like that need people. You know, one of the biggest unique selling points I think that I've got is my background, and that I've got a working class background, and I really try and utilise those roots in my professional career, in terms of, you know, people I know from school getting arrested, you know, they'll call me up and ask for help, and I can refer them on to a solicitor. But it also goes deeper than that, about maintaining those links with your local community and really sort of pushing, you know, agendas that need to be pushed.
Can I ask you, just, you know, based on what you've just been saying, what's it like for you as a woman of colour in this profession?
Well, I mean, I'll be honest, Leslie, I don't profess to have experienced anywhere near the difficulties that you as a black man have experienced. I'm mixed race, my dad's from Jamaica, my mum's white, I've got very curly hair, but I'm quite light skinned. Black people look at me, and black people know that I've got black in me. White people look at me and think, is she Spanish? Is she Moroccan? You know, they're not quite sure. And I certainly haven't walked into a courtroom and been mistaken for the defendant. I'm pretty sure that that's happened to you. I know that's happened to black male colleagues of mine who are at the same level as me. And so in a way, I feel like I benefit from a sort of mixed race privilege, you know, a lighty privilege. And that's something that I have to recognise. For me, the biggest barrister was my class. It was the fact that I was poor, that I came from a working class background, that my mum was a single parent, and that we didn't have the money, you know, to be able to do the things that other people were able to do. I wasn't able to go and do an unpaid internship. I wasn't able to go and work for the United Nations, etc. So I identify with your struggle, because what you describe happening to you as a 13-year-old schoolboy is exactly what's happened to my brothers. But has it ever happened to me? No. Have I ever walked into a courtroom and felt like I was being judged because of the colour of my skin? No. But that's probably because they can't tell that I've got black in me. So that's the truth.
That's really interesting.
I think we're almost out of time, but Leslie, I just want to ask you this sort of last question, really, and it's about what Tara was talking about at the beginning, about you being the first black professor of law at Gresham College in its 400-year history, which I didn't know. And I think Jo Delahunty, who did the opening keynote, you're taking over from her. Yeah. So really, just before we close for questions, I guess, how do you intend to use this platform, and do you think it's compatible with, you know, the amazing work that you do, you know, representing the rights of people who have lost loved ones at the hands of the state?
Well, the first thing to say, I'm really, really honoured by the fact that Gresham, you know, chose me. It was an open competition. In fact, I know Jo. Jo gave me the heads up when her tenure was coming to an end, and she contacted me and said to me that Gresham were advertising for a new law professor. and she said that she thought that I ought to apply for it. So I did. And I had to think long and hard about how to sell myself and the basis, because the way it works at Gresham, you have to do a series of 6 lectures a year over the next 3 years. So that's 18 lectures. And you have to do them in a way that you do an interesting theme. And I thought to myself, and I looked at the previous Gresham lectures, and I thought, nobody has done a complete series on the work that I do. That's you know, deaths in custody, the rights of individuals, you know, Black deaths, and the irony is, I developed this series of lectures at the beginning of the year. One of the lectures that I'm going to be talking in the series is the police need to exercise more restraint when they restrain you.
Yeah.
And then the week that Gresham announces my professorship was the very week that George Floyd was murdered.
Wow.
And you know, I just thought to myself, there is a purpose, there's a reason why I've been given this platform. So I've been, you know, I'm really pleased that I've been given this platform, because it allows me to shout from the ceiling about the inhumanity of certain types of policing, the unfairness, the discriminatory way that particularly Black people, Black men, Black boys, Black women are singled out. You know, you just look at what's happening during COVID, that the numbers are just horrendous. The disproportionality of how Black people have been singled out. And here's the thing, you know, when David Lammy did his report in 2017, you know, he made it absolutely clear. The figures are there, that you know, these are government stats in relation to the disproportionality of how Black people have been singled out, which I would say unfairly, and you know, there is racism there. Nothing done. None of his recommendations implemented. And yet we have our government in 2020 on the back of George Floyd saying, "Oh, we've got to look at this again." What is there to look at? Everything's been done. How many times do we have to have working parties looking at how people have been ill-treated, discriminated against, and subject to racism? So I'm using my platform and social media, shouting from the rooftops and making it clear until I will shout until my voice is hoarse and until nobody wants to listen to me. That's how I'm using the platform. And people are listening to me because, oh, suddenly I've got professorship in front of my name. So I'm using it.
Certainly for our generation, I think everyone wants to listen to what you've got to say. So please keep shouting. Someone's just put in the chat, "I will shout with you." Good.
Shall we take some questions?
Yeah, Tara, is Tara still there? Is Tara gonna? Are you asking us questions now, Tara?
Yes, I'm just going to pull the questions from the chat. So we've got a question which is actually very similar to what I wanted to ask you both. Thanks, Danielle and Leslie. It's incredibly inspiring to hear from you both. I wondered how you keep going in the face of disappointing outcomes in cases. I'm a trainee at the moment, but I worked for several years in actions against the police and inquests. I found it so disheartening that the same issues came up time and time again with prison deaths, and all you had at the end was a preventing future deaths report. No meaningful change. Do you want to take this one, Leslie?
All right. You know, it is really demoralizing. Let me tell you a very short story. I remember when I first started doing police actions, and must have been my first 5 or 6 trials. Each trial I lost. And these were cases that I thought were winnable. and I just couldn't get it. And you know, you'd come, you'd lose, you'd think about it, you know, you'd have to explain to the clients, you know, it'd be devastating for them. You'd have to speak to the solicitors, and then, you know, I'd look at me, I would think, is this something wrong? Is this something that I'm doing wrong? You know, and there were times when I thought, you know, is it because I'm black? You know, is it because I'm black that, you know, is it my color that is losing these cases for these clients? And then I thought, you know, I didn't stop. And then the next case, I remember I winning my first case. And then I won my second case in a row. And then I just went on this spree where I just kept on winning everything, right? And I realized that what I could do, and what I began to do, was to use my blackness as a weapon in these cases. And I would politicize, and judges hated it, because what I would do, I'd do a speech and I'd really personalize the speech. I'd say, you're looking at me as a black man, you probably think because I'm, and that was something that was not done at the time. In fact, you were taught as part of advocacy not to personalize speeches in that way. But I did it. I began to break the rules and I began to win. And I thought to myself, you know what that is telling me, there is more than one way of doing these things, and there is no right way. And so that boosted me on and carried me on. And I realized that even though you might have a string of losses, even though it looks like you're doing the same thing, continue, because you will get those wins, and those wins will encourage you to fight on.
Yeah, I mean, when I heard the question, I was actually thinking, even I'm not saying anyone would have done anything wrong. For example, those cases that you worked on, it's not necessarily that you do anything wrong, but you get better. You get better because the anger that you feel from those injustices fuels you, and you're ready next time. So in the magistrates court, there have been so many cases that I should have won. There have been so many cases, and, you know, for whatever reason, the verdict didn't go my way. But I tell you what, the next time I did a case that had a sort of similar factual matrix, even though, you know, the defendant was different, and obviously everyone is an individual, but when the issues were the same, I was better, I was more articulate, I was angry, I knew about the procedure more, so that if there was any objection to admissibility of a certain piece of evidence, I'd already had the argument. And so you get better, you stay angry, and you appeal. I appeal everything. I mock one of our colleagues in Chambers, Audrey, because she appeals she does a skeleton argument for everything, and she appeals everything. But honestly, like, you have to meet fire with fire sometimes. And I would say that where there's a real burning injustice and you feel it in your gut, and you know, appeal. And, you know, it can take a long time sometimes, but, you know, there are those glimmers of hope that you see in the future. I mean, the facial recognition case of Bridges that was in the news in earlier this week or last week, you know, obviously the High Court initially said no, the use of the technology is lawful, and Liberty went on and appealed it, and now we've got a ruling that says that it was unlawful. So yeah, just keep fighting.
Thanks, Leslie and Danielle. That's a great point about just brushing yourself up, fighting again, and learning from things you might have done differently in the previous case. I had a similar experience earlier this year at my first inquest that I did as a qualified solicitor. But yeah, you learn from things that you may have done differently, and then for your next inquest, you know that you're going to war. Just checking the Q&A box. Okay, another interesting question. Hello, and sorry, it's disappeared. Yes, I would like to know if it's possible for someone who is of African origin to become a barrister without changing the way they speak or trying to make themselves fit in.
I saw this question pop up earlier, and it actually reminded me of a story not told by me, told by Helena Kennedy. And just before I joined just before I started the bar course, I went to a talk at it was the College of Law then, it's the University of Law now, and Helena was talking, and she was describing what it was like for her as a woman when she first entered the profession. And for those who don't know, Helena's Scottish. Her accent's sort of watered down a little bit over the years, but when she first started the profession, she had quite a strong accent. And she said that she went into court and spoke to a judge, and the judge was incredibly patronising and kept asking her to repeat things, even though she was speaking very clearly. It was absolutely nothing to do with her her pronunciation or anything like that. And that story really stuck with me, because I'm obviously not from London, although I now live in London, and I've got more of a regional accent, I would say. But accent is certainly something that I think can be overcome with a little bit of pushback and with a little bit of sort of challenging anyone who sort of would seek to make you think that you had to change the way you speak. I think we're moving away from the old-fashioned days where you have to talk with a sort of BBC accent. And I think Helena's sort of journey, she's a baroness and, very, very accomplished, a silk, would be evidence of that. Leslie, I don't know if you agree or disagree or have had a similar experience.
I would say that you don't need to change the way you speak in terms accents are what make you. It's you, it's your, and I feel it's important that we embrace who we are. What is important though, what you might need to do, and what I had to do, was I had to slow down the way I spoke, because I had really fast South London accent, and that's the way I used to speak. And that didn't have anything to do with my accent, but it had to do with my delivery. I was speaking so fast, people couldn't catch what I was saying. So now I speak, reasonably slowly. That's because I think slowly as well. But I speak reasonably slowly. So I would say it's a question that I'm often asked: do you need to change the way you speak? What's important, if you're at the bar, you're in the we are in the game of trying to persuade, because we're trying to change people's minds. That's what we do. And if you want to try to change somebody's mind, if you want to persuade somebody, I do think it's important that the person hears what you have to say. And if you are speaking too fast, I think it's important that that you slow your speech down so that they can understand you. But do not misunderstand what I'm saying. I'm not saying that you need to change accents. I'm not saying that you need to suddenly, the most annoying thing, when I see somebody who suddenly speaks with a plum in their mouth, and they come from Streatham or something like that, and I just think, why are you speaking like that? Because the other thing is, if you are not true or genuine to yourself, people can see through it. And I think it's really important for you to be who you are. So that's the advice I'd give on that.
Thanks very much, Bert. A couple of questions have come through about the impact of COVID on your work. and any advice that you'd give to aspiring legal aid lawyers who are worried about sustainability?
Me? Well, impact of COVID. So I'm in a sort of strange position because, like I say, I got tenancy at Garden Court. I had my interview at the end of March, and I think I got the call telling me I got tenancy at the start of April. So I have been a new tenant for the whole of lockdown and for the whole of this pandemic. I practice exclusively in crime, and obviously we've had difficulties there with the jury system. You know, over 40,000 cases of, you know, there's over 40,000 trials waiting, so there's a huge backlog, and it is difficult at the minute for someone who's very junior. I haven't been in physical court properly since March. I went to the Crown Court yesterday for the first time and wore my wig and gown for the first time since March. So it's all incredibly surreal. But I suppose in terms of individuals hoping to enter the bar, from a crime perspective, there is always going to be crime. There are always going to be criminal trials, and there are always going to be the need for criminal barristers. So in terms of what the future holds and the stability of the criminal bar, I'm relatively confident that, you know, we will continue as we have for hundreds of years. But in the short term, the reality is there isn't as much Crown Court work at the minute, because the court estate, the physical court buildings, can't accommodate jury trials in a safe way. Something is going to have to be done because this backlog is huge. And I hope that the government are sort of paying attention to what's happening now and see that there's a need for investment in the court estate moving forward. But I'm confident that the criminal bar will ride this out. Obviously, there are horror stories out there about chambers folding, and I think there was a survey that was done that said that lots of chambers didn't anticipate being able to survive or to weather out this pandemic. The courts are gearing back up again, trials are being listed, and everyone's doing what they can. But again, this is one of those hurdles that you may have to scale. This is one of those things that you may have to be incredibly resilient in the face of overwhelming evidence to the contrary. You know, this may be something that you have to just put to one side and be very pig-headed and like a dog with a bone if you want to be a barrister. And it might mean that things are delayed for you slightly. I know that a lot of chambers have sort of put their recruitment on hold, and chambers are certainly reducing the number of pupilages that they're offering for next year. But it doesn't mean that we're going anywhere. It just means that, like every other industry, we're having to weather the storm a little bit. But as an advocate for, you know, criminal law, I would say rest assured that the criminal bar is not going anywhere. And that, you know, in the near future, hopefully, safely, we'll be back in court where we should be.
I think it's tough. I think it's really, really, the whole COVID situation and life at the bar is difficult. It's not easy. I've seen many junior colleagues, particularly in civil litigation, struggle. You know, those of us who do a lot of legal aid work, and we are dependent on being in court to, you know, as you know, or as you may not know, barristers are self-employed. And if we're not working, you're not earning. If you're not earning, you're not eating. And I know that a number of barristers who were over the, you know, the government aid provisions, they were earning more than 50,000, but less than 100,000. But because they don't have money coming in, it may sound like that it's a lot of money if you're, you know, if you're on a, you know, on an income between 50,000 and 100,000. But it's only a lot of money if you've got money coming in, and if you've got no money coming in because you're not working and you're not in court, it's extremely difficult to survive, particularly if you've got, you know, all the other things, bills in life that you have to pay. So I think it's really, really difficult. As for my personal circumstances, because I deal with death, you know, because my cases are dealing with, you know, state incompetence or, you know, state negligence, and the irony, the COVID situation has been good for me, because I can see a ton of cases coming out of the government's incompetence and the number of needless deaths that have occurred. I'm going to be busy for years to come. There will be an inquiry into COVID. You know, I've been dealing with a number of big public inquiries. Grenfell has still been running. So personally, it hasn't affected me, but I can see how it's affected a lot of my colleagues, and the situation is not good.
And just off the back of that, just to say, and again, I hope that this gives some hope to people who are wanting to practice in this profession. One thing you can be assured of is that coming to the bar, this is a profession that looks after its most junior members. And the reason I say this is because the Barristers Benevolent Association have been absolutely crucial in me being able to pay my rent during this pandemic, because, you know, I've struggled at times, and the Barristers Benevolent Association, I've not me personally, but the Inns of Court, I've heard, have been particularly generous in giving awards out, and even, you know, your own chambers will. I certainly know that if Garden Court knew that I was struggling, or felt that I was struggling, that things would be done, because this is a profession that tends to look after its most junior members. And so for anyone out there who's wanting to come to the profession and is a little bit worried about money, yes, it is a concern. It's a concern for me, but certainly the Barristers Benevolent Association, and from friends of mine in a temple who have given out, you know, interest-free loans to a lot of people to help them during this time period. You know, there are people who will help when needed. When the government fails to help, and when the government, you know, doesn't step up, the bar will look after its own, in my experience.
Thanks both. That's really reassuring, Danielle. I'm conscious of the time, but I think we've got time for one more question. There's been a few questions about diversity at the bar, so I'm just going to put two of them together. So firstly, what more can be done to improve diversity at the bar? And how do we achieve intersectional equality at the bar? How do minorities at the bar work together to get rid of structures that harm all minority groups?
Okay, shall I start?
Yeah.
So I'm not a race expert. I will start by saying that, or a discrimination expert, but I've been thinking about it for some time. I've got a 14-point plan. I'm not going to go through all of it, but let me just deal with the theoretical side. My plan for improving the lot of people of colour, and not just people of colour, all minorities at the bar, has a theoretical side and a practical side. Can I just tell you what the theoretical side is? Firstly, I think it's really important that whatever organisation you're talking about, well, if you're talking about the bar, that's the bar itself. I think that as an organisation, it needs to be persuaded that it has to acknowledge there's a problem, right, with discrimination of all types, as it pertains to recruitment, retention, and promotion. You see, if an organisation is not willing to confront the fact that there is a problem, if it's not willing to take that first step, you're not going to get any effective change. And so here's the thing. Theoretically, is the bar, barristers, or is the law society, is the solicitor's profession, you insert whatever, prepared to take that step and to accept that there is a problem. You know, for example, the police have got a real problem, because for you to have the commission of the Metropolitan Police to come out and say, I don't think there's institutional racism. What the? I'm not even. You know.
No, Leslie, I'm so glad you say that, because every time they come out with that, I just think, do you not remember what happened in very recent history?
So that's number one. Number two, I'll be quick. Number two, I think you need to persuade those in positions of power in the organisation to dismantle the idea, right? You need to dismantle this idea that most forms of recruitment, which come from our traditional model, which is the academic model of achievement, built purely on the idea of a meritocracy. It's a myth. There is no pure meritocracy, right? And how do I know that? Well, just look at recent study. You know, the study that occurred, I think it was last year, or maybe it was 2018, of Black Oxbridge students who came out with firsts, and then they compared their job recruitment and promotion chances with their white colleagues, and they were 50% less likely to be taken on than their white counterparts. How is that? How can you say a meritocracy when you've got an issue like that, when you've got Black Oxbridge students who are 50% less likely than their white counterparts to be taken on, when they got firsts? Thirdly, we need to throw away these false notions about employers or organisation chambers or firms of solicitors being equal opportunity employers, and that we can resolve the problem with unconscious bias training. These traditionally have been ineffective tools certainly in the last 20 years and have not made any material difference, certainly in my mind, in the advancement of certain minority groups. And finally, this is the final thing in the theoretical thing that I think we need to do. We need to remove the focus away from being on white people. If, for example, the issue is, if we're talking about race, or on men, if the issue is talking about gender, or on the able-bodied, if the issue is talking about disability. Because implementing change is not, we're not looking at, you know, how it's impacting on you as a white person. We're looking at the structural unfairnesses and how it impacts on Black people or people of colour. And it's the system that we're looking at. It's not a personal look at how this impacts on individuals. So those are the four things, certainly theoretically. I could talk about this all evening, but we don't have time. Danielle, what do you say?
I think primarily what I can do as someone at my level is I can look back and I can look at the people who are like me and who are on their way, and I can look at what I can do to help them. So I'm not very far down the journey myself, but I can certainly help other individuals climb the ladder that I've already climbed. And so I've got 3 mentees at the minute who are all women of colour. I have set up a WhatsApp group with them all. We have Zoom calls with the 4 of us. And I'm very clear about what I can do. You know, I can help with written applications for pupillage, because I've done it quite recently myself. So I'm probably better placed to do that than a Silk or a judge anyway. But I think probably the most important thing I can do is I can bring them into my network, because this is, again, something that Helena Kennedy said when I went to that same talk I talked about. She said the key to social mobility and the key to moving into, you know, a sector that you just traditionally wouldn't be in is 2 things. And it's about having a network, and it's about having the know-how. And this is what white male Etonians have had for years. They've had a network. And now my network isn't as broad as yours, Leslie, but it is a good network because I worked at Doughty Street. I paralegaled for years. I was an intern at Justice. I've been at 3 different chambers, and across all of those different organisations, I've met people that I would class as, you know, friends / you know, work colleagues who I can call upon. And I've got this excellent, you know, exceptional network for someone of my level of call, I think. And so what can I do? Well, I can bring my 3 mentees in and I can say, well, actually, I can put you in contact with Leslie because, you know, I'm doing a talk with him later. And that then exposes them to the people who are going to be able to help them go on and succeed. So practically speaking, that's what I can do. That is what I will continue to do, to bring in more people like me, because I want to see more people like me when I walk into a robing room, when I'm in front of a judge. I would love to be in front of a woman of colour as a judge in the Crown Court. I think it's only ever happened to me once, and I've been doing this job for 3 years. And the way I can do that on some small micro scale is by bringing people with me. So, you know, if there are people out there who need support, who need mentoring, who need guidance, you know, speak up, ask out, and keep knocking down those doors, because it's people that are just a little bit further ahead from you that are probably going to be the most helpful in terms of helping you get to that next level. And that's really, you know, what I think we can and should be doing.
Thank you so much, both. I think, unfortunately, we don't have time for any more questions, but thank you so much for what has been a really interesting and inspiring conversation between you both. Thanks for giving up your Friday evenings to talk to us. I know you both are incredibly busy with your casework. So everyone, that draws the Young Lawyers Making Change Festival, our 3rd conference, to a close. Thank you so much to all of our speakers who have joined us over the past 2 weeks. We are incredibly grateful, and I'm sure you've inspired the new generation of social justice lawyers. Special thanks to the Legal Education Foundation who sponsor us, without whom this would not be possible. Thank you so much to everyone on the organising committee at PLP, YLAO and the Justice First Fellowship. Huge thank you to Alan and Overy, who provided the prize money for our quiz last Friday. Emily, thank you so much for being in the background for every single event over the past 2 weeks. We could not have done it without you. Also, thank you so much to Bolt, Bird and Kemp solicitors who provided the Zoom facility for the quiz last week. And just finally, there will be a feedback form circulating next week to all of our attendees. Please take 5 minutes to just fill it in. We really want to do this conference again next year, but for that we really need great feedback from you guys. If there's anything that we could have done differently, or if there's anyone you wanted to hear from, please do let us know and we will take it all on board. There will be a conference next year and we will let you know when it is. Really hope it's in person next year. So hope to see lots of you there. Thank you so much, everyone.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Everyone, have good weekends.
Thanks, Emily.